Welcome to The Randy Report. I'm Randy Slovacek, your host. I'm also the writer and editor of therandyreport.com, where you can find me every single day on the internet reporting on the daily news cycle in terms of politics, pop culture, and entertainment news of interest to the LGBTQ community. In this week's headlines, the Trump administration is considering a new, narrow definition of gender that would virtually erase transgender Americans out of existence. Nancy Pelosi says the Equality Act would be a high priority for a democratically controlled House of Representatives. Trump voters believe straight men face more discrimination than gays or just about anybody. And RuPaul wants to make sure you sissy that vote. All that and more on this episode of The Randy Report. The Trump-Pence administration continues its assault on the LGBTQ community as the Department of Health and Human Services proposes a new, extremely narrow definition of sex that would virtually erase the existence of 1.4 million transgender Americans. The New York Times reported this weekend that the Trump administration is considering a new definition of gender as a biological, immutable condition determined by genitalia at birth, the most drastic move yet in a government-wide effort to roll back recognition and protections of transgender people under federal civil rights law. Now, during the Obama administration, policies were set in place which loosened the legal concept of gender in regard to federal programs like education and health care, which recognized gender largely as an individual's choice and not predetermined by the sex assigned at birth. Conservatives, however, especially evangelical Christians, were incensed by the idea. Now, the Department of Health and Human Services is leading an effort to establish a legal definition of sex under Title IX, the federal civil rights law that bans gender discrimination in education programs that receive government financial assistance, according to a memo obtained by the New York Times. The memo reads, quote, "Sex means a person's status as male or female based on immutable biological traits identifiable by or at birth. The sex listed on a person's birth certificate, as originally issued, shall constitute definitive proof of a person's sex unless rebutted by reliable genetic evidence." End quote. Now, according to reports, the HHS department is also trying to persuade the Departments of Education, Justice, and Labor to adopt the same policy in an effort to provide a more unified front in the certain-to-be-filed lawsuits. Now, it will come as no surprise to you that the director of the Office for Civil Rights at the Department of Health and Human Services, Roger Severino, didn't respond to questions on the proposal. Severino came to the HHS department last year after serving as a scholar at the virulently anti-LGBT Heritage Foundation, where he pushed several anti-transgender ideas, including support for North Carolina's anti-trans bathroom law, House Bill 2. The Human Rights Campaign quickly issued a statement denouncing the new HHS proposal. HRC President Chad Griffin said in a statement, "Setting a destructive precedent, the Trump-Pence administration intends to erase LGBTQ people from federal civil rights protections and eviscerate enforcement of non-discrimination laws." Now, the answer to all of this would be the passage of the Equality Act, which adds clear, comprehensive, non-discrimination protections for LGBTQ people to our nation's civil rights laws. The legislation already has 246 co-sponsors in Congress, and 117 major corporations have announced their support. And speaking of the Equality Act, should the Democrats take control of the House of Representatives after the midterm elections, probable Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, says passing the long-overdue Equality Act would be a high priority. Speaking at an event this week at the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard University, Pelosi named the Equality Act as a personal goal in wide-ranging remarks about her plans for the next Congress. Introduced by Representative David Cicilline of Rhode Island in the House and Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon in the Senate, the Equality Act would amend the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Fair Housing Act to ban anti-LGBT discrimination in employment, housing, public accommodations, jury service, education, federal programs, and credit. The bill also seeks to update federal law to include sex in the list of protected classes in public accommodation, in addition to expanding the definition of public accommodations to include retail stores, banks, transportation services, and healthcare services. Further, the Equality Act would establish that the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, boo, a 1994 law aimed at protecting so-called religious liberty, can't be used to enable anti-LGBT discrimination. Polling by the Human Rights Campaign has found that nearly 2/3 of self-identified LGBTQ Americans report experiencing discrimination. A new poll by The Economist shows Trump voters believe, I can't even say this with a straight face, believe straight men are more discriminated against than LGBTQ people, women, African Americans, or Mexican Americans. The poll asked, how much discrimination do the following people face in America today? And respondents were given the options of none at all, not much, a fair amount, and a great deal for all of the questions. 49% of Trump voters said straight men face either a great deal or a fair amount of discrimination. Oh yes, folks. 41% of Trump voters said LGBT people face the same amount of bias. 42% of Trump voters said Mexican Americans face a great deal or a fair amount of discrimination. Only 38% said the same thing about African Americans. One more stat from the survey of 1,500 Americans. Only 30% thought women faced a great deal or a fair amount of discrimination. Things that make you go, In August, I reported on a police sting operation that resulted in the arrest of 13 men having consensual sex in a private area of the Pleasure Emporium Adult Boutique in Hollywood, South Florida. Now, Judge Ginger Lerner Wren has dismissed all the charges against 2 of the defendants. At the time of the arrests, police officers had gone to the trouble of paying $25 to enter locked, private rooms at the back of the Pleasure Emporium in South Florida where men were masturbating and engaging in oral sex, consensually. The state had argued that an unsuspecting patron of the Pleasure Emporium could accidentally wander in and observe the sexual activity. But Judge Wren disagreed. From her ruling, the court finds that the Pleasure Emporium is not a public place under FS 800.03, where the patrons who access the private viewing theaters where consensual sexual activity occurs in the presence of other consenting adults objectively and subjectively possess a reasonable expectation of privacy. Following the raid, the police department released the names and photos of those arrested to the media. Several major media outlets published that information, which in effect outed some of them to their co-workers and families. One man was apparently fired from his job due to the public outings. Meanwhile, the Sun-Sentinel reports that while the Hollywood Police Department is spending its time busting gay men for consensual sex in a private setting, the HPD is none too worked up about investigating actual sex crimes. For instance, in 2014, the Hollywood Police Department reported it had 94 rape kits sitting in storage, gathering dust, and some hadn't been tested for as many as 9 years. According to the 2017 National School Climate Survey from GLSEN, the Gay, Lesbian, and Straight Education Network, progress in making schools more inclusive and less hostile for LGBTQ students has slowed down after years of improvement. The survey polled more than 23,000 students across the United States ages 13 to 21 between April and August of 2017. The average age of participants was 15.6 years old, and 4 in 10 of those surveys identified as gay or lesbian. The results of the survey show that after years of declining harassment, the improving climate seems to have plateaued. Here's a list of stats from the survey. It's kind of long, but I think it's important to know how young LGBTs feel about the world they live in. Here we go. Almost 60% of LGBTQ students felt unsafe at school because of their sexual orientation. 44% were uncomfortable because of their gender expression. Almost 35% of LGBTQ students say they missed a day of school in the past month because they felt unsafe. 4 in 10 avoided gender-segregated spaces like bathrooms or locker rooms due to safety concerns. 98.5% of LGBTQ students have heard the term gay used in a negative way. 70% say they hear these remarks frequently. 70.1% of LGBTQ students say they've experienced verbal harassment based on sexual orientation, almost 60% based on gender expression. Almost 30% of those students say they've been physically harassed, that's being pushed or shoved, based on their sexual orientation. 24.4% say they've been harassed based on gender expression. 12.4% of LGBTQ students say they've been physically assaulted, that's being punched or kicked, based on their sexual orientation, and 11.2% say they've been punched or kicked, physically assaulted, based on gender expression. 42.2% of LGBTQ students say they considered dropping out of school due to harassment. 48.7% of those students have experienced cyberbullying in the past year. 57.3% of LGBTQ students reported being sexually harassed in the past year at school. The majority of LGBTQ students, 55.3%, who were victimized in school, did not report the incident, believing no effective intervention would happen or the situation could become worse. Of the students who did report an incident, 60.4% say school staff did nothing or told the student to ignore it. One piece of good news: more students reported having a gay-straight alliance, 53.3% at their school, than ever before. The data shows that when a school offers a gay-straight alliance, LGBTQ students were less likely to hear homophobic or transphobic slurs. They saw more intervention by school personnel and were less likely to feel unsafe at school due to their sexual orientation. I encourage you to head over to glisten.org to read the full report, or of course, at therandyreport.com. RuPaul wants you to sissy that vote. In a new Get Out the Vote spot posted to Twitter by World of Wonder, RuPaul encourages everyone who loves her show to also get into the democratic process with as much fervor. Check it out.
Do you love RuPaul's Drag Race? We love giving it to you. And here's how you can give back. Go to vote.gov to find out how you can register. And then, on November 6th, you better vote, sis.
It will come as no surprise to anyone who listens to the Randy Report that these midterm elections are important to anyone looking to slow down the momentum of the Trump administration, which has placed a target on the LGBTQ community by trying to keep trans people out of the military, rolling back protections for the transgender community in schools and prisons, siding with religious fanatics who want to deny our rights, and firing the HIV/AIDS Council, and that's just the short list. So as RuPaul says, make sure you show up on November 6th and vote. Or better yet, if your state has early voting, do that. And that brings me to the end of this episode of The Randy Report. If you enjoy catching up on LGBTQ news in a quick podcast, I'd appreciate it if you wouldn't mind sharing The Randy Report with your friends. I like to think of this podcast as the 60 minutes of gay news, only shorter. And remember, you can find me every single day on the internet at therandyreport.com and at instinctmagazine.com and at gaypopbuzz.com, where I cover the daily news cycle regarding politics, pop culture, and entertainment news of interest to the LGBTQ community. Thanks for listening, folks. See you next time.